Jane Yolen's The Devil's Arithmetic tells the story of 13-year-old Hannah Stern, who is growing up in New Rochelle, New York. Every year, Hannah and her family celebrate the Passover Seder, and every year the same stories from her grandfather's time during the Holocaust are shared. Hannah is tired of remembering old family stories, passages of Hebrew, and repeated traditions. However, this Passover is different. Hannah opens the door to symbolically welcome the prophet Elijah. To her surprise, she is transported into the past as Shia, her aunt's friend from long ago. Hannah realizes she has been taken back to Poland during World War II. During this journey, Hannah finds herself in a concentration camp where she gains a deeper understanding of her family's background and learns to appreciate where she comes from. Jane Yolen was born in 1939 in New York City. She grew up in a Jewish home similar to Hannah's. With a cafe journalist for her father, she found that even at a young age, writing was in her blood. She wrote exceptionally and continuously all throughout her school career, and while she was still a kid, she began a neighborhood newspaper for their apartment building with the help of her brother. Together they interviewed neighbors and wrote articles for which their mother then typed out. Yolen worked hard to keep excelling in her music and art high school and continued her education at Smith College. While at Smith, Yolen won awards for poetry and journalism and dabbled in writing for school musicals in which she also performed. It was after this that she moved to New York to become an editor and eventually a children's author. Her works now total around 300 books. Although the story of this particular book does not come from personal experience, Jane has collected stories that have evolved from her relatives. Many of the ideas portrayed throughout this book come from her Uncle Lewis's experiences during the Holocaust. Jane felt obligated to write this book because she felt the story needed to be told, and dedicates this novel to her Yolen grandparents who brought their family over in the 1900s, second class, not steerage, and to her Berlin grandparents who came over close to that same time and settled in Virginia. They were the lucky ones. This book is a memorial for those who are not. She hopes that the readers will get a deeper understanding and become more aware of the historical events that have changed today's society.
Hannah's story begins with a family gathering in their hometown of New Rochelle, New York. New Rochelle is located on the southeastern part of New York, bordering the Long Island Sound, about 2 miles south of where the author grew up in New York City. New Rochelle is historically a heterogeneous community, and by 1865, more than 30% of the town's population was foreign-born. This included families from Ireland, Poland, and Germany, which ties into Hannah's family story with her relatives. In addition, as of 1999, there were 700 Orthodox Jewish families in the city, which is around the time the modern part of the novel takes place. The city is now comprised of a population that is 14% Jewish in its religious makeup. New Rochelle was a particularly affluent and urban community in New York during Hannah's childhood in the story, and it continues to be that way today. This urban lifestyle that Hannah is used to makes for a very interesting contrast to the village in which she next finds herself. Though the 1940s Polish village Hannah is transported to is fictional, shtetls such as this were quite common throughout rural Eastern Europe in these days. Shtetl is the Yiddish word for small town and refers to these small Jewish communities that were often found in the midst of forests and fields. Jews who lived in these communities often worked hard in small family businesses in the town proper or on the surrounding land, which was useful for raising animals and crops. The book does not state exactly where this village is, nor does it clarify the location of the neighboring fictional village Viosk, but it does mention that the girl Hannah seems to have become, Shia, is originally from Lublin, Poland, giving us a slight geographical clue. Lublin is a city located in the eastern part of Poland, meaning the shtetls mentioned in the story may have been close by. Plains and an abundance of water that can be found here due to the presence of many branches of the Vistula River categorize this region. These sorts of conditions would have been very beneficial to the rural lifestyle that Chaya's aunt and uncle lead in the book. The climate in this part of Poland is also given a nod in the story. A friend Hannah meets in the concentration camp tells her she is lucky to have missed the harsh winter they have just endured. She is lucky to come when a mild spring has begun. Harsh winters and mild springs are both characteristic of the climate in eastern Poland. Geographically speaking, Poland's shared border with Germany made it an easy target for the invasion that began the war. Thus, Poland was filled with concentration camps during the war.
The novel begins with Hannah heading to her grandparents' house to celebrate Passover as they do every year. Hannah is reluctant about attending this year's Passover and claims it is a celebration to simply eat. Hannah's mom reminds her that Passover isn't about eating, it's about remembering. Passover is a Jewish holiday that is celebrated in an 8-day celebration from the 15th through the 22nd of the Hebrew month of Nisan. This is the first month of the Jewish calendar and falls between late March and April in the modern-day calendar. Passover celebrates the emancipation of the Israelites from slavery in ancient Egypt through meals known as seders, reciting the Haggadah and eating matzo, or flat unleavened bread, instead of shamitz, leavened grain. The first 2 days are full-fledged holidays. Candles are lit and meals are enjoyed at night, known as seder. The word seder means order, and the events of the night take place in a certain order. In the book, Hannah is upset about her family's seder because she says that seder wasn't even in the right order, not like they taught it in Sunday school. Although seder means order, this is true in some families, including Hannah's. In traditional seder, the Haggadah is read as it retells the story of the Jews' exodus from Egypt. The Seder begins with a cup of wine or grape juice for younger kids, which sanctifies the holiday. There is a Seder plate presented that includes symbolic food items as a reminder of the past. The plate includes the following items: mehor, bitter herbs, usually horseradish, that recall the bitter times the Jews suffered. In the book, Hannah did not like this one bit. She thought it was unfair that her friends got to eat jelly beans and she had to eat horseradish. Parus, a sweet paste made from fruit and nuts, symbolizing the mortar and the slaves used to build the Egyptian pyramids. Salt water is used to symbolize the tears of the slaves. Karpas, a green leafy vegetable, symbolizes the hope and redemption. Zera, a shank bone, represents the slaughtered land, and Beitza, a hard-boiled egg, symbolizes life and birth associated with spring. During the entirety of Passover, it is forbidden to eat shamitz, leavened grain products like bread and pasta. This is because the Jewish tradition states that while rushing to escape from Egypt, the Jews did not have enough time to wait for the bread to rise. This is why they eat matzah, the flat, unleavened bread. Children are an important part of Seder as they take part in the rituals and customs. The youngest child is to recite 4 questions which ask why Seder is more special than other nights. Aaron, Hannah's younger brother, is to read the 4 questions at this year's Seder, and Hannah recalls when she had to read them. Children also participate in the search of a fikumen, a piece of matzo that is hidden early in the evening. Hannah remembered when she, as the only child, had been the one to take the afikumen. She suddenly felt very adult-like and advised Aaron on what prize to take for the afikumen. Traditionally, the finder is always rewarded with the prize or money. As the meal continues, the rest of the cups of wine are served. The final cup is the cup of Elijah. It is filled and the front door is opened to allow Prophet Elijah to enter. In the book, this is where Hannah is transported to the Polish village.
The Second World War was the most widespread and deadliest war in history. There was still a lot of tension from the First Great War that was left unresolved, particularly relating to the political and economical instability of Germany. The war officially began in 1939 when the dictator of Germany, Adolf Hitler, invaded Poland. This event led to many more battles and conflicts throughout the nation. This war involved 2 opposing military powers, the Axis and Allies. The Axis consisted of Germany, Italy, and Japan. The Allies consisted of the United States of America, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and China. The opposing forces fought against one another for 6 long years.
After roughly 20 years of peace, the world went to war for a second time. Welcome to watchmojo.com, and today we'll be exploring how World War II began. The Second World War is considered a direct result of the First World War due to unresolved tensions and anger from that conflict. However, the Great Depression of the 1930s was another factor that led to bitterness and a shift in public attitudes towards strict dictatorships. World War I also facilitated the rise of Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party. Hitler's allies in Italy and Japan also acted aggressively with the hope of expanding their territories. Hostilities by these countries towards the communism of the Soviet Union was just another factor that helped lead to war. In fact, a number of ideologies helped spark the war. Aggressive expansionism by countries like Germany and Italy, fascist dictatorships, and deep-seated racism were all considered contributing factors. This racism was mostly in Germany, where the Nazis believed the Aryan race was the master race and superior to the Slavic people. The countries that eventually formed the Allied alliance acted passively in the face of the Axis threat. This was partly out of sympathy, partly out of guilt because of the Treaty of Versailles that blamed the Germans for World War I, and partly because countries like Britain underestimated Hitler. Meanwhile, the League of Nations proved itself ineffective in the fight to keep the peace. A few months after Japan withdrew from the League of Nations in 1933, Germany did the same. In 1935, Germany violated the Treaty of Versailles by introducing mandatory military conscription and by beginning rearmament. That country continued to violate the treaty in the years that followed. In fact, in 1936, Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland. It was around this time Nazi Germany formed their important alliance with Italy. Soon after, the two countries offered support to the separatist movement in the Spanish Civil War, while the existing government was supported by the Soviet Union. These events foreshadowed the Second World War, as both sides were testing different methods and weapons of battle.
One of the most tragic and horrifying events of World War II was the Holocaust. The German leaders who were in power at the time believed themselves to be racially superior, while Jews were seen as inferior. Germans also targeted others such as Gypsies, Poles, Russians, and many more. Germany began to target Jews initially by excluding Jews from civil society. Next, some Jews were transported to ghettos. The most common and gruesome way of eliminating Jews was by concentration camps. Once Germany took over Poland, concentration camps were established throughout the country. Jews were given strenuous tasks to complete and many of them were killed for being weak, ill, or for not following orders. A total of 6 million Jews were killed during the duration of the Holocaust. Throughout the story, Hannah, known as Shaya, makes references to World War II while in the concentration camp. She remembers her grandfather's stories from being in the concentration camp and facts that she learned in school. Shaya immediately remembers the ovens and gas chambers that were used to kill Jews. She also recalls the Jews having to get their heads shaved in order to not spread diseases. Shaya vaguely remembers specific facts throughout her time in the concentration camp. After fighting for an extensive period of time, Western Allied forces invaded Germany and captured Berlin in 1945. German forces surrendered on May 8, 1945. This day was known as VE Day, standing for Victory Day for the Allied forces. Allied forces began to liberate concentration camp prisoners. The United States then dropped 2 atomic bombs in Japan on August 6 and 9 in 1945. The invasion of Japan caused them to surrender, ending World War II. This war was a victory for the Allied forces.
When Shaya arrives at the concentration camp, Rivka gives her many rules to remember in order to survive. She tells her to avoid people whose numbers start with G, because they are Greek Jews who don't understand German and are more likely to be killed for not following orders, along with anyone around them. She says Shaya can trust those whose numbers are smaller because they have been around longer and know how things work. Most importantly, Rivka tells Shaya to help get the kids to the midden pile when the commandant comes to inspect the camp. The commandant isn't supposed to allow children under 14, so they must hide the younger children in a big pile of garbage when he comes around so that they aren't killed. Yolen tells us at the end of the book that this detail was taken from the experience of one of her friends. While the concentration camp in the book was not a real place, many of the details were based off of concentration camps that actually existed, such as Auschwitz, Treblinka, Chelmno, and Sobibor. For example, the book mentions a sign on the killing wall that reads, Arbeit macht frei, which means work makes you free. The concentration camp Auschwitz featured the same phrase on the entrance gate, as well as a similar killing wall that has been preserved through today. Yolen also mentions that most of the events in the book come from things that really happened, like the nightmare of journeys in cattle's cars, the shaving of heads, the tattooing of numbers, the separation of families, the malnutrition, the lack of proper clothing, and the choosing of victims for incineration. The book also includes many words that were actually used during the time, such as musclemen and commandos. Commandos are groups of Jews who were forced to work for the Nazis, and in the book, Rivka's brother Wolf is a commando, forced to escort people into the gas chambers at the camp. Musclemen are what the campers call people who give up trying to survive. Rivka says they stop seeing it as if they decide that life is not worth fighting for. Giving up is not encouraged among the Jews, who try to be positive and maintain their spirit despite their situation. Although 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust, many others live to tell the story, and their culture is still alive and thriving today.
יש דירות תיל וצריפים, ומאות אלפי אנשים מוזרים כאלה, עם בגדי פסים, בלי שערות, עושים לנו כל מיני תנועות, ואנחנו לא מבינים, לא שומעים מה שהם אומרים, אבל צועקים, אומרים לנו משהו. אמרת, אוי, מסכנים, הנה, משוגעים, סגרו אותם פה, את המשוגעים האלה. תראי איך הם מתנהגים, תראי איך הם נראים, מי יודע מה קרה. ואחרי שעתיים אנחנו מגיעים לאולם גדול, הנגר כזה ענקי, ספסלים, אומרים, תשמעו, אתם נסעתם המון ימים, אתם עייפים, מלוכלכים, תתפשטו, תקפלו יפה את הבגדים, כל אחד ישים על ספסל שיזכור איפה הוא השאיר את הבגדים שלו, ורק תחזיקו את הנעליים בידיים, ואנחנו נכנסים למקלחת. אנחנו באמת נכנסנו למקלחת, אבל היה צפוף ולא, המים האלה אפילו לא הספיקו להתרטב. ואז פותחים דלת, אנחנו לא חוזרים באולם איפה שהתפשטנו, אנחנו יוצאים בדלת אחרת. באולם השני אנחנו עוד עדיין ערומות, יושבים ספרים עם מכונת, ובנות שורות, עשרות ספרים, מספרים את הנשים. כמובן שערות מכל הצבעים, מכל האורך, ערימות של שערות על הרצפה, ופתאום אנשים לא מכירים אחד את השני. אנחנו קודם כל בהלם, אנחנו גם לא חושבים איך הגענו פה, מה קרה. אנחנו לא יכולים לשחזר את כל מה שקרה לנו מהבוקר עד עכשיו. נכנסת אחת השומרות, ואנחנו שואלים, תגידי, זה נכון שבסוף שבוע אנחנו נפגוש את ההורים, את המשפחה? היא אומרת, מי אמר לכם את זה? הורים, משפחה? אתם רואים את הערובות, אתה רואה את העשן, הם כבר בשמיים. מה את מדברת שטויות? את משוגעת? מה, אתם לא מריחים את הריח של בשר חרוך? שורפים את האנשים. אני לא משוגעת, תבינו לאן הגעתם.